Cheddar, welcome back to Between Bells. Car collecting is no longer your rich grandpa's hobby. The past 2 years have seen a spike in millennial investment in cars, and with newer models overtaking vintage collectible autos. Here to tell us more about all of that and the surprising new developments about the new sought-after models and which ones they are is McKeel Hagerty, CEO of Hagerty Insurance. McKeel, thank you so much for joining us. So why are millennials so interested in collecting very different, strange cars?
Well, you know, I get the question asked to me all the time, is the next generation going to be interested in cars like their parents were or their grandparents? And the reality is they are. They may be delaying getting their driver's licenses. They may be delaying buying regular cars and homes and all of that sort of thing. But the oldest millennials are now 36 years old by most people's definition of that generation, and they were raised in that environment where cars are cool, but they're interested in different stuff than their parents were, and in no small way because obviously they want to buy stuff that's sporty and that's fun to drive, but they're buying things that are affordable.
So tell us what years we're talking about. Are we talking about the 90s? Are we talking about the 80s? What's this year, range that millennials are now viewing as classic collectors?
Yeah, it's a great question. And so from the newer era of vehicles, we're talking sort of 1980s and newer, so up to and including new cars. And from a traditional collecting standpoint, the big expensive cars that you read about at the auctions and that sort of thing, and in the big car shows, those tend to be significantly older than that. And 80s and 90s cars were kind of considered mass production vehicles, not of particular interest, and now they're just absolutely taking off. And it's happening so fast that all of the traditional ways of tracking both sales and the information about them are sort of behind the times. So 80s and 90s cars, and they range from, a lot of millennials in particular are very interested in German sporty cars, inexpensive sporty cars, Japanese cars, what you might call vintage SUVs or maybe off-road vehicles that they grew up around with, and they're much more comfortable with modified cars, whereas an older generation, they thought modifying a car either made it really super cool, like a hot rod, or they thought it was butchering the car. The next generation sort of looks at it like adding a new app to their phone, which is, hey, if I change this thing, it's mine, I get to upgrade it that way. So there are a couple of really cool developments in there, and they're cars that people never thought would be collectible that are pretty hot on the list now.
Okay, so let's maybe break down some of the ones that are really hot on the list. We've actually gotten the 5 cars that we want to talk about specifically with you. One of them in particular is a 99 to 2009 Honda S2000.
Yeah, well, this is one of these great modern cars. I mean, Hondas were not generally considered collectible by any standard, but they were great cars. They were incredibly reliable by nature. I mean, that was how Honda designed them. And they kind of have this muscular, sporty look. And they definitely went, down in value, as all new cars do. They sort of depreciate in value, and then they started making their way back up. So, now we're seeing good examples of that S2000 in the range of $18,000 to $25,000. Which certainly isn't free, but definitely is putting it in that range where somebody who is trying to make their way in the world wants to have a really cool car to drive around on the weekend, that they can buy a lot of fun for not a lot of money.
Okay, let's go to this next one, which is a little more feasible for me. 2006 BMW M3, so it's a little sportier, so I get that. So why is this a hot new, demand for millennials when it comes to car collecting?
You just want it because it's a convertible, honey.
Yeah, I want a convertible.
Yeah. And they're pretty cool. So BMW M Series cars were always the sporty examples of any BMW model that they had. And the M3 is traditionally it's been their smallest car. And these cars were raced in a bunch of racing series around Europe for a long time. And so when they introduced the M3, and particularly we're talking about the kind of 2000, 2006, these were great, reliable cars, very sporty. They have both a contemporary look, but kind of a classic, BMW feel to it. And they're 10 to 15 grand. But for this, the next generation looks at these things and they just think cool. So, and we're all about cool.
All right, the next one I think is really interesting. Do you want to say something about this one?
Well, I just wanted to say, you said it's 10 to 15 grand. Can you kind of give us a quick overview of all the price range of why? I'm assuming price is driving, the popularity in these cars. Is that the average price range that we're looking to spend as millennials collecting cars? Is 10 to 15 grand?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, one of the cars on our list is actually a much higher price car, the Nissan Skyline. This is a car that was a sort of mythical fish, if you will, in the U.S. market because they were not imported here for a long time. So those are a much dearer car, more like in the $80,000 range and even higher because they're such an incredible performance car that were limited originally to just the Japanese market for a long time, and only did you start seeing importing later on. So you can see cars as low as $4,000 to $10,000, and as I recommend, and your lead into the whole thing, you said, my gosh, there's a Subaru on the list, but that's another one of those cars that younger generations are saying, look, I don't care whether my parents wanted it or not. I think the car is cool. It's got good looks and it has great performance. But you can buy a pretty good example of one of those, Subaru WRXs in the sort of $4,000, $5,000, $7,000 range, which again is not a lot of money. Doesn't mean it's going to be the last collectible car anybody will ever own. You tend to have the gateway drug car that gets you into it, and as you have
I'm
a
really
good
sorry to interrupt. I really want to get to the last couple of cars. We only have a couple minutes left of the hour.
Sure.
I want us to talk about the Subaru. Obviously, it's a collector one, a 2002 to 2004 Subaru Impreza, and then there's also a Nissan Skyline, which I love, from 1989 to 1994.
So why are these on the list?
So as I mentioned before, the Nissan Skyline is probably the dearest one, the rarest one on that list. They weren't ever delivered to this market, and people were always trying to get them. So now that they're around, this is absolutely a younger generation car, but they can be 80 to 100 grand. And absolutely the Subaru WRX. This is a car that was inspired by Subaru's many successes in rally driving. And the next generation is very much interested in rally style of competitions. Older style of driving competitions like, the Indy 500 and Formula One are cool, but rallying is pretty cool with the next generation. So every one of these cars often has some heritage related to either motorsports or, something related to a performance activity in the culture the car came from. So,
McKeel, we have 20 seconds. Please tell us why I need to get a Pontiac GTO.
Hey, look, this is the only good American car on this list where it's almost all the performance of a Corvette, but for a significantly lower price. And for those who love American kind of muscle-style cars, this is understated, and it's really pretty bad. So awesome car for not a lot of money.
Well, you're taking us down a big old trip down memory lane. I've seen a lot of these cars when I was in high school, so it's interesting to see what they look like now.
Definitely. Well, thank you so much, McKeel Hagerty, CEO of Hagerty Insurance, for joining us. We appreciate it.